Thank you. Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago that I was on that side, and we had a similar series called Convocation. And I got some really nice ideas and some good things from that group. So I hope today I can do some things that will help you guys to do a little better, have better ideas, think a little differently, and hopefully avoid at least one scraped knee along the way. I think it's probably, there's a couple of directions we could go with this, right? We can talk about like, what is it like to manage finances as a business owner? We can talk about sort of the things I've learned along the way. But I think where I want to start is telling you guys real quick a couple of things about me, and then I'd love to see if you guys have, from this series, any questions that you haven't been getting answered. You know, I think we all sign up for a class with an idea of like, hey, here's some things I want to learn, right? And maybe some of those are getting answered and maybe some of them aren't. So if we can figure out what you guys aren't getting answered, maybe I can shed some insight on that. I'll let you guys in on a little secret. I don't have all the answers, but I will do my best to answer them. I have worked with about 2,000 business owners over the last couple of years. Last decade, helping them grow their business, grow their finances, make good strategic financial moves. And a big part of that is like creating life fulfillment. My company's called Big Life Financial, not Big Money Financial, because the whole point of the idea of money is to increase your quality of life, right? Most of us think more money is going to be a higher quality of life. I can tell you firsthand that I've talked to a lot of people and I've experienced it personally where at times more is not better, okay? So we really want to focus on if the quality of my life goes down where my finances or my money or my wealth goes up, that's actually a bad trade for you. You really want it to go the other way, right, to where your quality of life is always being improved. So let me just tell you guys a little bit about my background. Then we may go through some of the lessons, but I want to give you maybe 30 more seconds to think about the questions you might have. But throughout my life, the first business I started was a real estate investor. You guys have seen all the house flipper shows? I was one of those guys. In fact, I got asked at one point to be on one of those shows. And the last thing I wanted to do with my business was a guy following me around with a camera, because being a house flipper is kind of messy, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes wrong and things you have to figure out, and the solutions aren't always clean and easy. So I didn't really need someone like, broadcasting my life while I was doing that. But flipped about 150-ish houses. In the '08 crash, I was doing that in Southern California. And all these houses I was buying at $200,000 and selling at $300,000. In about 6 months, they went to $160,000. So I was upside down in about 20 of them. And that all happened while I got hit by a snowmobile while snowboarding at Mammoth Mountain and broke my femur. So I'm laying in the hospital watching all my properties go down in value and wondering how I was going to get out of this. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But that was kind of my first stage. And the reason I transitioned out of that was a good friend of mine who's also an alumni here, Garrett Gunderson is his name. He hired me as a financial coach for business owners. He's like, you've owned your own business. I know you went through this really weird thing, but you know how to run a business, you know how to make money, you know about taxes, you know about all this stuff, and you also know about like creating a life that's worth living, not just like being business all the time. So he said, I really want you to come be a coach. And that's how I got into what I do now, which is helping business owners be smarter with their money and create a life that they love, right? So that's been the big transition for me. Along the way, I've done everything from slinging mattresses on Craigslist to selling art on the streets in New York City to all kinds of marketing. I've copywritten hundreds of emails and pages and all kinds of that stuff, which you guys get fed every day through social media. And built another real estate empire and built my own financial firm after working for someone else to learn how money and finances work. I primarily work now with doctors, dentists, people who are really good at what they do but don't know that much about money. So like their money IQ's down here, their medical IQ's up here. So we're helping to raise that up and help them to pay a lot less in taxes, be a lot smarter with the money that they have, and to distinguish that making money is one thing, keeping it is another, and then putting it to work is a whole nother. Those are three completely different skill sets. Most people only have one or maybe two of those. So, I try to help them round that out and have all three. So that just gives you like a little tiny bit of my story. Is there anything that you guys have had in your mind as you took this class that you were like, I really want to hear about X, or I'm wondering about Y, something that you haven't been able to ask so far? Yes, sir.
Every speaker we've had thus far talks about how they want to help younger people get into business and help them grow and do their thing.
Yeah.
Is that purely an altruistic motive, or is there a financial gain there as well, that they're like, hey, if I help build you up and I do it for nothing to start, I know you're going to be successful, so I get a kickback down the road?
There may be people who are doing that. I like to think most of the people who are here are successful enough that they don't need that, but everybody's got their own motivation. For me, I just find that when you put out good in the world, good comes back. So, I feel like everybody who does things, even altruistic stuff, there's a payoff, right? I truly believe human beings are wired, so we will do what we think is in our best interest. Now, what actually is in your best interest and what you think is in your best interest may not be the same thing, but I think people are always doing what they think is in their best interest, and a lot of times there is a payoff. If you can help some people or meet some people who are young and feel like, hey, I gave back, or I impacted them in a way that somebody else has impacted me, because everybody I know who's successful has had not just a mentor, usually many mentors, and taken a lot of bits and pieces along the way. So I like to think that they're here trying to help you guys and not necessarily benefit. I mean, I don't know if they're giving you QR codes or opt-in codes at the end of the speaking gig, but yeah, I like to think most of them are here truly because they want to give back. They see themselves in you. So, yeah.
What kind of personality traits does a successful business owner have?
I think that depends a lot on the business you're in, right? In today's world, when I went to school, the internet was just really becoming a thing, and so software development and all that wasn't nearly as prevalent as today. A lot of the top tech entrepreneurs are these software guys, right? And I think that's a completely different skill set than, say, someone who's going to create a thought leadership group, or somebody who's going to build a trucking company. So I really think it depends on the type of business you're in. But I will say that I think most people seem to focus either on one or the other of either making more money, like sales, right? Let's bring more money in, bring more money in, bring more money in. Or they have a tendency to focus on keeping money and checking every single dollar and minimizing expenses. So you sort of have the person who's the expander, increase the sales, do more, but they don't pay attention to the back end. So it's like pouring all this money into a bucket with holes. And then you have the other people who have a tendency to patch up all the holes in the bucket, but they don't focus on putting more money in the bucket. And so they've got a whole different set of problems, right? So you have one who makes a lot and spends a lot. And then you usually have one who doesn't make nearly as much, but is really optimized and really effective with what they have. I think it takes both. So I think the biggest thing is to understand where your tendencies are. Am I let's just bring the money in the door and we'll deal with the rest later? Or am I let's make sure that the money that does come in is really, really well taken care of? If you're one and not the other, you should probably hire someone who's the other, right? So ideally, you're at least a little bit of both of those. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think it varies quite widely on the industry and what you're trying to do. So.
Yes.
I feel like entrepreneurship is such a popular career path right now.
Uh-huh.
But what are some indicators that maybe a person shouldn't become an entrepreneur?
I've along the way I had as I talked about, some businesses that have failed and struggled, and so I went back to work for people for a period of time, right? And I think the appeal to being an employee is, if you want to clock out at 5 every night and just not have to worry about work until you go back at 9 in the morning, that might be an indicator that maybe being an entrepreneur isn't for you, even though you can very much control your time. And one of the points I would make is if you are an entrepreneur, you want to have an off switch at some point, because if you don't, you go through burnout, right? If you're just always on, always learning, always business, 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 and you can't shut your mind off. If you don't like to deal with adversity, like one of the things that I think is the hardest thing about being an entrepreneur, especially in the early stages, is you wake up in the morning and you're like, what am I going to do today? Like, what's the best use of my time? If you don't deal well with really open parameters, it can be tough. It can be really tough. Someone who really likes structure all the time and really works well there might be more well suited to, at least for a period of time, be a W-2 or work for someone else, or maybe be an independent contractor, right? Which is kind of your own business, but you're not trying to build a big company. You just are kind of being your own business as an individual. So I think people who don't deal well with really wide open parameters, because like being an employee, I'll give you a comparison, is like coloring in a coloring book, right? It can still be complicated. There's lots of things to fill out. You got to pick the colors, and there's room there. Being an entrepreneur is like taking a blank page and drawing a picture, right? It takes a lot more figuring out, and if you don't like to do that kind of stuff, maybe it's not for you. You know, those would be my best answers, because it's like anything. There's trade-offs, right? You have all this freedom and all this opportunity, but at the same time, you have to take all that freedom and opportunity and turn it into something, or nobody's going to pay you just for showing up. Whereas the other has a lot more structure, but maybe a little bit more of a ceiling in working for a bigger company or corporation or someone else. But I think you just have to decide what makes you happy. You know, sometimes you work with someone who is the entrepreneur and you're a right-hand person, and they create some of the structure and they create some things, and you still get to fly free and do amazing things and have an incredible career. So I think it's a balance of figuring out what's right for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes?
A little bit ago you mentioned something about there's people who like bring in a lot of money and there's people who save money.
Mm-hmm.
I think you mentioned something about people using their money to make more money. I was just wondering if you're going to get more into that. That's something that I myself am interested, like with the entrepreneurship. Like, how do you use as an entrepreneur your money to expound that forward?
Okay, great question. This is a really important question, and one where my answer might be a little bit controversial. I believe for entrepreneurs that in a lot of cases, the stock market is not the answer for people, because as an entrepreneur, I truly believe your two biggest assets, your two biggest investments are in yourself, because how you go, the business goes. If you're a mess, it's very unlikely that your business is going to do really well, right? Just as a human. Nobody has it together all the way, but you need to be able to pull it together. So I think investing in yourself, skill sets, mindset, working with good people who help you to kind of find your place where you flourish, because nobody's good at everything, right? So you need good people around you. And then the other thing is, I think, investing in your business first. What I see a lot kind of on that side of people who optimize money is I work with some entrepreneurs who don't make a whole lot. They optimize every penny, and they're trying to invest this and squeeze a percent out here or out there on $1,000, right? So they make an extra $10 a year, but they spend all this time on that. I think investing in your business first and getting that going, and then once you get the business going and you feel like I'm not robbing my business to put that money into some outside investment over here, because most people don't know about the stock market, right? Like, they watch YouTube videos or something, but let me just tell you, when you're competing in something like the stock market, and a lot of investments fall under this category, you're competing against the smartest people in the world. The guys with the best education and $1 trillion of software and teams of people gathering data and maybe even some insider trading, and you're trying to beat those guys every day in something like the market. I feel like in your business, you don't have those kind of odds. And if let's say you run a business and you serve customers, you make a certain widget. And you know that if I add one more machine to my business, we have the demand. It's a guaranteed rate of return that when I buy that equipment, it's going to turn the $2,000 or the $10,000 I put into that into $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 a year. I would start with those kind of investments. in your area of core competency. So my rules with investing are invest in things you know about, which would be your business and yourself, things you care about, because if you don't care about stuff, you don't pay attention. And I don't know if you guys have really picked up on this, but things you don't pay attention to in life don't do very well. Try not paying attention to your relationship or the person you're dating. How does that go? Not very well, right? Try not paying attention to your health. You guys are still young enough that maybe you haven't seen the ramifications of this personally, but you probably know people who don't pay attention to their health and they suffer, right? And your money's the same way. If you don't pay attention to where your money is put, it won't do too well, right? So your business is one of those things that you know about it because you spend all your time there. You care about it because you started it and it's probably like your baby, and you have some control. And so I would say trying to invest in those things first, and then eventually when you get enough money going, you can do some of these other passive things. What I see really often is people split their energy way too early. I'll never forget this. I was coaching this business guy. He was really smart, but he was struggling. And he's like, Derick, I've started 10 businesses and none of them are working. And I was like, 10% of your energy is never going to be enough to make a successful business, right? So he was so diversified that he thought, in his mind, if I start 10, at least one's going to take off. But if you can't give any energy to any of the 10, of course none of them are going to take off, right? So we have to remember we like focus, and especially early in your career, focus over diversification. Get really good at one thing, right? And that'll be the engine to your financial world. And then from there, you can spin off and do other things. So that would be my best advice early on in your career. And then if we get into, once you have millions of dollars, what should you do with it? There's a lot of paths to go that way. And the biggest one is you got to get tax efficient, because if you're in the highest tax brackets right now, you're 45 to 50% of every dollar you make goes to the government. So you want to get really good at taxes once you make much money. So did that help? Okay, thank you. Anybody on this side of the room? I feel like it's all over here. You guys probably came in first, so if you're on the far side. Any other questions or anything that you guys thought, I signed up for this class, I'd love to know this thing? Yes?
How did you learn so much about taxes? How do you think someone that wants to learn about it, how they should go about learning about it?
So taxes were an interesting thing, right? Like, who grows up thinking, I want to learn about taxes? Most boring thing ever, right? Like, my business right now is tax strategy and a lot of life insurance strategies. And we work really closely with an investment firm and estate planning firms. But who thinks they want to grow up and talk about life insurance and taxes, right? What I discovered was I love to teach people about things. And when we got into money, a lot of my clients, especially as I got higher and higher net worth clients, they were always complaining, taxes, God, how do I pay less taxes? How do I pay less taxes? And it becomes a really big deal. Like, I have a client, he made $1.2 million last year and he paid over $600,000 in taxes. That'd be a really frustrating check to write, right? You're like, I'm taking all the risk, I'm doing all the work, I'm doing all these things that could go wrong, and the government gets half. So the more I heard it, one of the points I wanted to make today is to listen. Once you have a business, listen to your clients. They will tell you what they want, right? Like, the reason that everybody, all these social media companies are so powerful, Google and Facebook and TikTok and everything, is they're gathering all the data, they're listening to what you want, and then they're giving it to you. So as a business owner, you can learn from that. My clients, even though we were teaching them how to grow money, were all complaining about taxes all the time. And the second I shifted and said, well, let's get good at the tax thing. So I didn't want to. It was just so important to my clients. And I didn't want them going somewhere else and talking to somebody who didn't know what they were talking about and creating a mess in their mind, that we just figured we need to get really good at this. It's so important to our clients. So we started doing a lot of research for our clients. I started taking my high net worth clients to people who knew more than me, advisors, high net worth people, estate planning people, and they started teaching strategies, and obviously I was in those meetings and learned from them. So I think the best way to get good at taxes is to work with people who teach tax strategy, right? Like, get a mentor. The tax code, if you guys don't know this, it's if you were to compare it, it's about as thick as the Harry Potter books, right? A lot less exciting. Trust me, if you've tried to read tax code, even tax code that we use all the time, I read it. I can't understand the actual code. I have to look at like the guidance, which tells you how the tax code really works. But if you want to read like the Treasury regulations or the guidance on particular things, you can learn that way. But it's so much faster to learn from people who are already doing it, would be my best advice. But I didn't even want to get there. My clients needed it. And I will tell you guys this, the second we focused on taxes, like my business more than doubled the first year, and the second year it more than doubled again, right? And the second doubling is a lot bigger than the first one. So taxes all of a sudden were just a vacuum that just sucked us in and got us so many referrals because it's such a hot button for people who are in our demographic, which is 500,000 plus earners. You know, we work with a lot of people who don't earn that, but I would say 80% of our clients do for that reason. So was that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'll start with you.
How are you helping your clients with like recession?
Yeah, I get a lot of questions about this, and you watch on YouTube, right, and every day they're telling you, oh, this is going to crash, and that's going to crash, and this is going to explode, and this is the next big thing. I think we want to stick with fundamentals, right? One of my favorite quotes is, and this is something that I think everybody should write down in your business, is it comes from Jeff Bezos. He was interviewed, and it was the same kind of thing. It was like, technology is changing so fast. How are you guys going to continue to compete? And he said, we're not building our business based on what's going to change. We're building Amazon based on what's going to stay the same. People want good products, fast, and at a good price. Never going away, right? So the same thing with preparing for the recession. What are good, sound financial principles, right? Because the big thing, and you guys may not realize this, is where there's chaos, and it's coming, where there's chaos, there's opportunity. When everything's super efficient, it's really hard to like find your niche, your nuance, right? So for a lot of our clients, I'm saying stay flexible. We like people to be liquid because the biggest way that people get hurt is they don't have enough money to like get through a hard part. Does that make sense? Like what happened to me when I was a real estate guy, we had all these houses, we were flipping them. I had all this money in them and I couldn't sell them because I was in a hospital bed. And at one point I had over $1 million in equity in my properties and I couldn't even keep my lights on because I didn't have liquidity. So liquidity is a big one, right? Also, sticking with things that you know really, really well. Once again, this isn't the time for people to go and make a wild guess on something they don't understand. I'm actually long-term a believer that like crypto is like the next sort of wave of technology, but all the people who invested in crypto and didn't understand it are just getting destroyed right now, right? Because they didn't know about it. They knew that it seemed really cool and there was lots of hype, but most people I talk to about crypto don't know anything about it. So they were overextending themselves into things they don't know. So I think stick with things you really know. Focus on being really good at your core competency. If you think that competency is going to go away, and most of my people are doctors, dentists, these kinds of people, so that's not really going away. It might change a little bit, but sticking with things that you understand and staying flexible and liquid so that you can adapt, because it's so hard to project how things are going to change, right? Like one of the other principles that I like to teach is don't ever set your whole life up or your whole finance or your businesses up such that if one thing, any one thing goes wrong, that it can sink the whole ship. Because like people would say, I'm a real estate investor. People always need a place to live. Except during the pandemic, the government said you can't collect rent for 2 years. Never happened before, but it happened, right? The world's never shut down for a pandemic. Never happened before, but it happened. In 2008, for 2 years, banks stopped lending. Never happened before, but it happened. Things that have never happened before happen about every year or two, right? So you don't want to build your life on one particular thing. Ideally, get really good at what you do, and then you can start diversifying that and stabilize your business. But I think people sticking to what they know and staying liquid right now are probably the two most important things, just to make sure you get through to the other side.
So obviously not every business is successful or like makes it.
Right.
Like what do you recommend to people? Like how do you tell if your business, if it just is going to take more willpower and work, or whether it's something that you should, give up on and look at for a different opportunity somewhere else.
Man, this is like the question for the ages, right? It's like you're at home praying, even if you're not religious, and thinking, am I just supposed to push through this and keep going? Are you testing my willpower? Or are you telling me to stop and go somewhere else, right? And it's like this constant question. I would say this one is tough. I would say if you see other people who have been successful at it and you're just not being successful, you can probably push through because you know there's a successful business model there. If you're starting with a brand new thing, right, you're creating a new app or whatever, there's tons of stories about people who invented something or came up with something that like just wasn't the right time, right? I think in that world, I would go as far as you can, but sort of fail within boundaries, right? I don't think you want to burn down your health. You don't want to burn down your family. You don't want to put yourself in a place where you can't recover from. So I think you go as far as your boundaries, your guardrails of what you've said, okay, I'm willing to spend X, or I'm willing to go this far in the hole for this thing, but at that point I got to stop. I think that's probably a good way to know. If you have to go beyond that, go be successful somewhere else. Maybe you can come back to it. But I do think it's really hard when you believe in something and like all your friends, nobody wants to be the person to be like, hey, your idea kind of sucks. Or it's kind of cool, but I don't want to buy it, right? Like there's those kind of things that are out there. I think if you're continually getting lukewarm feedback, or if you just can't sell it or find people who want to buy it, I would probably step away from it. And you can keep rethinking the idea until you find it right and test it. But I wouldn't burn your life down over it. I think that's where I'd step away. Did that help at all? I mean, I know that's a really hard one because you don't know, right? And we glamorize the people who just pushed through that. But generally speaking, if doing a thing isn't working, doing more of the same thing isn't going to work. One of my favorite cartoons, it was a political cartoon, but I think it applies here, is the guy's speaking at the front of the room and he's like, who wants change? And everybody raises their hand. And he's like, in the next cartoon, he's like, who wants to change? And nobody wants to raise their hand, right? We all want change, like as a business owner, and you're probably doing it the best way you think can work, so you don't want to change, but your outcome won't change unless you change. So that's another consideration. If you've changed every way you can think of and it's still not working, might be time to step back, do something else for a while, and then you can always come back to it.
So I feel like whenever most people come in here and they talk about starting their businesses, it usually starts with like the first few months or the first 4 months or the first year of just like this ridiculous hard work where you're up until 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning all the time.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's like, I don't want to say like the healthiest or the most efficient way to start, but do you think that there's a way to like start a really successful business just with like consistency, like raising a family and starting a business and like taking care of yourself? Like, do you think that it's more efficient to spend like that first however amount of time just spending all your energy, or do you think it's better?
Well, I think it's definitely better the other way. The question is, what's your situation, right? If you don't have $1 in the bank, you better spend as much energy as you can to get to profitability, right? And if that takes staying up till 11 because at the end of the month you can't pay your rent, you probably got to do that. But if you're in a situation where you've got some money saved, or you've got family support, or you've got a way to continue to endure, I do think long term you'll be much more productive having structure, right, around it and saying, okay, I'm going to work 10 hours a day. And one of the things my father told me when I started my business is he said, treat it like a job. It's really easy to, and it's the same thing with school, it's really easy to come here and you come to classes, so you kind of do the bricks, right, the stuff that's structured. But then like all that in-between stuff, you just kind of don't. You go screw around or hang out at the student center or whatever, go to the gym. I think a business can be the same way, where you want to have structure, but you want to work hard within that structure, or at least effectively within that. I don't even want to use the word hard, but yeah, I think you can absolutely do it. Tons of people I know do that. Dan Sullivan, who teaches some of the best entrepreneurs in the world, is 100% a believer that even if you're working super hardcore, you need to disconnect at least one 24-hour period per week. Like, don't even think about work, because just like, how many of you guys have ever exercised or worked out? That's good. A big part of building strength is recovery. And as a business owner, you need that recovery. You need that time with family and friends. You need that time with hobbies to recharge the batteries and remind you of why you're doing what you're doing. So many of my best ideas have come while I was rejuvenating and resting. So one of the tricks I learned when I had my first real estate business, I started it from my home. I had an office in there. But what I would do at the end of the day is I would walk out and I would close the door. And at that point, when I closed the door, I was closed for the night. Even if things came up, I would just ignore them until the morning. There are very few things that can't wait until the morning. Now, if you're in a business where you're on call 24/7, that may not be an option, right? If you're IT support for businesses, like, you probably can't have those kind of boundaries. But can you do it? 100%. You just need a little more structure and discipline. And you just need to, I think, a little bit of support, because it might take a little bit longer, but I think you're going to have a much healthier balance long term. But yes, you can do it. So I've never done that burn the midnight oil. I mean, I've done it over a weekend or something, but I've always believed in resting and rejuvenating, taking care of myself, because if I burn out, because I did have a time in my real estate career where I worked, I think, about 31 days in a row. I just didn't take a break, because real estate does a lot of stuff on the weekends, right? So I'm working business hours during the week, and then on the weekends, I'm doing a lot of real estate stuff, and I just found myself really resenting work and not enjoying it anymore, and that's a recipe for disaster. So, all right, any other questions? Okay, so let me look at the time. We've got about 10 or 15 more minutes here. So let me tell you guys a couple of things that I think are really, really important that I wanted to share. The first thing that was really has made such a difference to me in every business I've started is businesses are about systems and about people, right? I know that sounds like super basic, right? But if you even break it down further, it's about people, because guess who builds and runs the systems? People, right? Systems are very important. One of my favorite quotes, if you guys haven't read Atomic Habits, is by James Clear. He says, "You don't rise to the level of your willpower, you shrink to the level of your systems," right? You want to ideally set your business and your life up such that if you just follow the protocols, you're successful. You don't want to have to get up and do this Herculean effort every day to be successful, because willpower has been proven to wear out over time. So you don't want to rely on that. You want to have systems that support you and lift you up, right? And so systems and people, but really it comes down to people. Invest in your people, and the first employee, if you get the right one, is so important. With every business that I've ever built, that first employee usually takes my productivity 3 to 4x, because they get rid of all the minutia, right? All the follow-ups, all the callbacks, all the document gathering, all the stuff that doesn't really make you a whole lot of money but has to be done. And it doesn't take a lot of brain power. It just takes time and energy. A good person, a good assistant in the beginning will just quantum leap your business in a really good way. So I think as soon as you can afford it, and you want to be really careful on who you hire. I usually like to do a part-time hire and then bring them on full-time, so that way it's not as big of a financial commitment. We can try each other out. Makes a huge difference. Another little hack, and I don't know if this will matter to you guys, that I've been using lately is everybody's complaining it's hard to find good employees, right? For me, I actually went to virtual assistant groups and got VAs and hired them as 1099s and then eventually as employees if it made sense. But the thing about a VA is that's a person who's started their own business. So they're not just interested in clocking in and clocking out. They have a purpose for showing up. They want to be successful. They've built their own website. They've done their own stuff. They've invested in their skill set. That's a very different person than someone who just wants to show up, clock in and clock out, right? So having a really good person, to me, makes all the difference in the beginning. Total quantum leap. And then the other big thing is investing in your team and people in a way that they want to really work for you. You can't just have a business that's a job for people. I mean, you can, and there are certain businesses that work that way, but when you're talking about your core team, especially early on, you need people who care, right? And so I learned something actually here at SUU. One of my fraternity brothers was from Japan, and this has always stuck with me. He said, people do things for 3 reasons. They do things out of fear, right? And a lot of people run their company, if you don't do this, you're gonna get fired. And so a lot of people do it out of fear, and when you do that, people do the very minimum to not get fired. Well, that's not really what we want on people on our team, right? Second thing is people do things out of duty. You pay me X, I'll do Y. That's an equal trade. They're kind of keeping track of that. And that's not terrible. People who will give you a good effort for the money you pay them. But where you really want to get with people is people also do things out of love. And if you invest in your people, and if you care about them as humans, don't turn them into a dollar sign for you. These are real people with real families who are depending on you, who care about you, who have a work-life balance and a health and all that stuff. If you treat them that way, if you invest in their skill set, because you know what? Most of the people you hire aren't going to work for you for the rest of their life, right? But if you invest in them so that when they get their next job, they're going to make a lot more money and their life's going to be better, they know it. They care about you because you care about them. So I think investing in your people creates a situation where they work for you out of love. I am consistently amazed that people will, for the things that my people will do for me, right? They'll work late. I tell them, I'm like, you know, be done at night, go spend time with your family. A lot of them work from home because they want to be with their families. But I'm sending a text at midnight and they're like, or not a text, putting something in our Teams meetings, and people are immediately on there and they're answering questions and they're helping out. When I went on my honeymoon for 3 weeks, a couple weeks ago, my whole team took the ball and ran with it. They created all kinds of things because they wanted to take care of me and they didn't want me to have to jump in and do that. You can create that environment by genuinely caring about the people that you work with. And I would say the same thing with your clients. I think we're all so sick and tired of like being treated like a number, right? We all hate it when you can't get a real person to help you with something. It's a phone system. It's a frequently asked questions page. It's a chat bot, right? We're sick of that. Your clients, more than likely, don't want that. If you treat them like a person, not like a number, they want to work with you. They remember that. They refer you. If you listen to them and bring the things that they're asking you forward whenever you can, or refer them to people who can help them, then they realize that. Investing in people is, in my mind, is the most important thing you can do. Your clients, your employees, their family, your family. If you do that part right, you're going to end up with a good life, even if you make a little bit less money. And I think you'll actually make more money. The numbers show. When people love working at a place, productivity goes way up. So I think that's really, really important to do. So I lost track of the question there, but hopefully I answered it. And then I think the other really important thing is, this is my own personal struggle, so I'm going to just air my own laundry. There's things I like to do in my business and things I don't. I joke, a business is like having a baby. Like it's the cutest, sweetest, most awesome thing, and it comes with dirty diapers, right? So most of us don't want to do the dirty diaper part of a job. With a kid, you may not have a choice, right? But with your job, it's easy to neglect some of the things that you're not so great at. And I've kind of come up with this framework in my mind that there are things that we view as extra. Like early on, a lot of business owners I work with, like I ask them, what does it cost to run your business for a month? They don't know. Okay, how much does your business bring in a month? They don't know, right? They see knowing that stuff as extra. I don't have to track all my expenses. As long as there's money in the bank account, more seems to be coming in than's going out, I'm gonna be fine. They see all that as extra. And if you're just barely getting by, maybe it is. But if you truly want to be successful, it's necessary, right? You have to pay attention to these things. You have to know the numbers. You have to know what's working with your marketing or what's not working with your marketing. You have to know which of your people are productive and which ones aren't. A lot of these are things that you can get away with not doing, but they're limiting you. You see them as extra, but they're necessary. When you're in your 20s or your teens, sometimes working out feels like it's extra, right? Oh, only if I want to get ripped and buff and whatever, but I don't need to do that if I'm just regular. But the truth is, if you want to be really healthy, it's necessary. It's not extra, right? And there's so many things in life that we view as that's extra, and I would challenge you as you build your business to ask yourself, I don't like doing that thing. It's kind of extra. I can get away with not doing it. Ask yourself, if I want to play at an elite level, right? Like I sometimes compare myself to an NFL player. And we all see the sports commercials, right? The guys running the bleachers, they're up at dawn, they're dragging tires around, they're doing all kinds of weightlifting and stuff, like crazy, insane things. They're dieting. Are you doing that level with your business? And I don't mean you have to go crazy. I mean, are you holding yourself to the highest standards? Are you working with the best people? Are you saying, if I was going to run my business like an NFL football player, or like an NBA player, or like a professional gymnast, or whatever, am I treating it that way? Am I working on all the pieces that it takes to truly be excellent at what I do? Or am I more like junior varsity, right? I show up, I've got enough ability that I can kind of walk through it and get there, and it's enough that, you know, I can get through my life and I can make enough money to live on. Or do you truly want to play at the highest level? I think all those things you view as extra would be necessary if you really want to play at that level. So I would challenge you as you're moving into your business, you could apply this to your schooling, you could apply this to anything. All those things that you know you probably should be doing, but you can get away with not doing. What if you mastered those? Usually the thing that you're most afraid of doing is that thing that's holding you back. And it's usually the thing you're at least pushing off as extra. I don't have to do that. I'm okay without it. That's probably where your next big breakthrough is. And it's scary as heck, and it's uncomfortable. But you asked about, you know, what are qualities of people who maybe aren't suited for this? Being an entrepreneur is uncomfortable. And if you can't, on some level, get comfortable with the idea of uncomfortability, maybe it's not your thing, because you're continually moving into the unknown, right? In the beginning, it's a big scramble. At the end, you know, somebody's on top of the mountain. But in the middle, there's a lot of things where there are unmarked trails, and they're uncomfortable, and you got to try new things. So I think just being aware of that and knowing that the things you probably don't want to do, but know you should do, that's where you should be going with your uncomfortability. Master those things. Just take them from something that's in the way to an asset. So I think we only got about 5 more minutes. Any other questions here? Yes, sir.
So I think you can gain some good insight from this question, but if you were 20, again, having all the knowledge you have now, what is something you'd do different?
I think the first thing, if I was going to start a business, if I was like you and an entrepreneur, how I would approach it is I would look for a business that has recurring revenue, because I love recurring revenue, right? Like when I was flipping houses, the hardest thing about flipping a house is you flip a house, you get paid, and you move on to the next one, but there's no referrals. You know, people in foreclosure don't refer you to their friend that's in foreclosure, right? It's always reinventing the wheel, finding a new thing. I would look for a business that has recurring revenue. I would look for something that matters to me. Like, there's all this pursue your passion stuff out there, and I think that's great, but most people, when they think in those terms, think of hobbies. Right? I want to play guitar, I want to snowboard, I want to whatever, and those are fine, and some people can make a career out of them, but truly, I think it's important to find something that I feel like my work matters in the world. One of the reasons that I do what I do instead of continuing to flip houses is I like people a lot more than I like houses. I realized at one point, if I was to die today, the work I've done impacting people feels so much bigger to me than the fact that I flipped a bunch of houses, right? Like, who cares? I didn't really change the world. I mean, I helped some people out of a tough situation, and I helped some other people buy their dream house, and that's cool, but it didn't feel like I was having an impact in those people's lives. Whereas, like, doing this, I feel like I have an impact in people's lives. And so for me, life's going to be hard. Your business is going to be hard. And the only thing that's going to get you through the really hard times, because there's going to be times where it's not worth it, is doing work that matters. So I would look for something that matters to me, and then I would find a mentor. Someone who's doing now what I want to do in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, and I would try and work for them for a year or two, you'll learn so much from a professional person in that arena, and then you can go do your thing. So I would look for work that matters, recurring revenue, something that's at least interesting, right? And then find a mentor. I think that's how I would do it. So, all right, y'all. Well, we got 1 minute, but I figure I'm a little long-winded, so we probably can't answer too much in that amount of time. I appreciate you guys being here. You've been a great audience, so just appreciate the participation.